Welcome to the Prodigal and the Priest podcast, a podcast about faith, sports, and two friends from different cultures. Here are your hosts, Joey Scansella and Father Paul Bechter.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We actually came up to the church on an evening edition here today of Prodigal and the Priest and me, our question edition of the podcast. And we have a special guest with us today, and that's Jack McCaffrey.
McCafferty.
Okay. I saw McCaffrey, and I'm in football mode still from the school.
Yeah, he's still thinking Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jack, welcome to the show. How are you? Oh, wait.
We can't hear you, Jack.
I muted you. Go again.
All right, go again.
All right. Can you hear me now?
It's a very warm welcome. We're going to keep you muted, but...
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Glad to be here. Thank y'all for having me on.
Yeah, we're very excited. You are going to solve something that let me back up. I know you're kind of newer to the show, and so we take questions on the podcast and field a bunch of different questions. And very on, we had a question about the Byzantine Liturgy.
Okay.
And Father Paul said early on, I have a friend. I think he'd be great to answer this. We'll get back to this. And now it's been about 6 months of quarantine.
Yeah, 6 to 8 months.
Yeah. So we really wanted to be thorough, even though the person said, it doesn't have to be an in-depth answer. I just want a little bit. And so, we brought you on. As Father Paul said, you're the Byzantine expert. He has put you as. So we're excited to hear from you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, how you know Father Paul, all of that. And then Father Paul is going to intro a little bit more.
Sure. So Father Paul is my brother-in-law's cousin. It's my wife's sister is married to his cousin. He baptized my goddaughter. So they're Will and Amanda, that's who I'm referring to. Their daughter's my goddaughter, and Father Paul. I guess I've known him from the wedding, from all the different family events, and we've always had a good time talking. I grew up in the Byzantine Catholic tradition of the church, and so I know Father Paul's studied a lot of Eastern church fathers and biblical scholars and things, and so we've always had a lot to talk about in regards to that. So. I feel very honored to be considered the expert.
You are the expert. Yes, absolutely. Now, I have to ask before we get into the real questions, because we did a whole episode on baptism.
Sure.
Was it a valid baptism, or did he say we baptize you, or did he say
it was very valid?
Okay.
Very valid.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yes, very valid. More valid than that.
I had to check it.
it.
So, Father Paul, you want to say a few things too to intro this?
Yeah. No, it's great to finally have you on, Jack, and I really have enjoyed talking with you about liturgy, but it always feels like it's just we never have enough time to talk about it.
Agreed.
And so hopefully this will be more time. It still won't feel like enough time. I wanted to just lay a little groundwork before we even asked the question, this question that we've built up so much over these 6 months. And just give some context, because I know that for people who have grown up in the Latin liturgy of the Roman Catholic Church, they, especially if they've grown up in the States, sort of the Eastern Catholic churches can be very confusing with the different liturgies and things. And so,
sure.
So the way I would explain it is just first terminology. Jack is a member of you grew up as a Ruthenian Catholic, and you currently attend and are involved in a Melkite Catholic church.
Yes.
Both of those make use of the Byzantine rite. And Jack, feel free to correct me if I get anything wrong.
No, you're on point so far.
And so the Byzantine rite is a liturgy. It's a form of liturgical tradition that developed in the Byzantine Empire, and particularly, I think it has its origins in Antioch, actually. but it really takes shape in Constantinople, which was also called Byzantium. That's where you get the name. And that's relative to Rome anyway, that's in the east. That's in like where Turkey is, Istanbul. And so you have the Roman liturgy, which grew up in Rome and was, in different ways, looks different in different periods, but is essentially the same liturgy celebrated throughout the ages in Rome. That's the liturgy, or the rite, the Latin rite that we use in, I think, where most of our listeners are going to be familiar. But there are many other liturgical rites. I think there's 6 or 7 of them, but the most common outside of the Latin rite is the Byzantine rite. And there are several different Eastern churches. The Melkite church, which you attend right now, I think that church is a Middle Eastern origin,
Yes,
right?
It's the Patriarchate of Antioch.
Oh, okay.
The Greek Patriarchate of Antioch.
Right. And then tell us just a one-sentence thing about the Ruthenian church.
So the Ruthenian church is a self-governing church that comes out of Eastern Europe in the Carpatho-Rusin region. But it's in the United States. It's one of the bigger churches that uses the Byzantine rite, and it has there's a Metropolitan Archbishop in Pittsburgh who's kind of like the head of our church.
Yeah.
And so when I say self-governing, the canon law term is sui juris,
Right.
which means in its own right. So these churches kind of enjoy their own autonomy for the most part. They kind of run themselves. And the way that we know that we're Catholic is that we're in communion with each other. We can go to each other's churches and receive communion. And our hierarchs, our bishops, can celebrate liturgies together, whether that be a Roman Catholic Mass or an Eastern Catholic Divine Liturgy.
Right. I actually met I forget his name, but that bishop you mentioned from Pittsburgh, or who's in Pittsburgh.
That would be Metropolitan William, perhaps.
William, maybe. I think it might have been him. I definitely met a Ruthenian Metropolitan.
Got it.
He came to the North American College and was having lunch there, and I sat at his table.
Oh, awesome.
I remember he was really nice, but like we're definitely that's just like an extended example of the communion between East and West.
And Jack, what do you do for your day job?
So I'm a teacher. Yeah, I'm a teacher.
What do you teach?
I teach Spanish, actually. I'm a Spanish teacher.
Nice. So how many languages do you know?
I would say I'm fluent in 2 languages, but I'm familiar enough with, at our church, we're oftentimes singing in Greek and sometimes even Arabic, because we do have a Middle Eastern connection there.
So you could give Father Paul a run for his money.
I don't know. With Spanish for sure, but I don't know. He's got a few other under his belt.
I love it. Well, do you want to hear the question? I don't know if Father Paul shared it with you, but I would love to. Yeah,
absolutely. He mentioned it. I would love to hear the fullness of the question there, and then I'll speak to it as best I can.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to pull up our question things here, and this comes from a woman by the name of Patty. And Patty said, can you give a simple explanation? Notice it took us 8 months for a simple explanation, but yes, about the similarities and the differences between the Latin Rite and the Byzantine Rite, both part of the Catholic Church, ? I am Ukrainian Catholic, which is part of the Byzantine Rite. My mother and her family fled from Ukraine. They spent 4+ years in displaced Persians, refugee camps, and finally made it to America in 1949. God provided hugely. In the U.S., they were able to continue practicing their Ukraine faith, which they passed down to their children and grandchildren. I find that many Roman Catholics aren't aware that there are Byzantine Rite even exists and that it's under the Pope. So the main question, she gives some backstory about their personal life, but the main question there is, can you give some of the similarities and differences between the Latin Rite and Byzantine Rite?
Absolutely. I'm going to start with the similarities because I think that's, I think there's so many. A lot of times when we walk into a different church, we see the external things, we see the differences, and we make note of those. But there's so many similarities, and that's really one of the things that I think really brings us together. you are doing this series on the Mass, right? I've kind of been listening to that.
Yeah.
So I know that you guys talked about the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist, and our liturgy is divided into those same parts. So we have a liturgy of the Word. We open up. In fact, the first few parts of the liturgy of the Word is just us singing psalms. We call them antiphons, and we just sing psalms. And some of them might change depending on the time of year or what we're celebrating. But most of them are pretty standard, especially for Sundays. And from there, we kind of move into the Prokimenon, which is like your responsorial psalm, is what we call it. And then we have an epistle, a gospel. We have the priest comes out, he preaches. It could be a deacon as well. And from there, we have the liturgy of the Eucharist. And that basic breakdown is very similar. And then from there, there are differences that you would see. I want to make sure that I'm not overlooking any of the other similarities, but the basic structure is the same.
Yeah, it really is. I have a question.
Sure.
The antiphons that you sing at the beginning, you said several antiphons, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're singing psalms. And then after that, you have the Prokimenon, and then you have the epistle and the gospel. And so like that part really looks like the liturgy of the Word.
Absolutely.
The antiphons in that structure would correspond to where we have the penitential rite in the Latin liturgy. Is there a sort of preparatory or
Yes.
kind of that kind of role to those?
So before the antiphons, I should have mentioned we have a series of litanies, and so the litanies are kind of like usually the deacon, if you have a deacon there. If not, it's a priest. But asking for different, it's kind of petitionary prayers, and a lot of them are very much preparatory, asking for for unity in the faith, for the people to move their hearts towards God. We pray for everyone basically that has authority over us. Whether that be civil authorities or church authorities. So we kind of go through these like petitionary prayers leading up to those antiphons. That's like the first thing. The liturgy starts with the priest says, "Blessed is the kingdom of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." And then we go to those litanies. And then from there, the antiphons that are those psalms leading up to the actual readings themselves.
Okay.
That's
Great.
awesome.
Yeah, and I cut you off before you got to the differences. I'm not even sure if you were done with the similarities.
Well, I was just trying to, I'm certainly glad you did that. And please feel free, either of you guys, to just jump in there and ask me a question. So from there, I would say that one of the big differences is kind of like where we place the creed. I know that like the creed is usually said at the end of the liturgy of the Word in the Roman Catholic Mass. Is that correct? In the Latin Rite?
Yes.
And it's kind of like this pinnacle moment of that particular piece of the liturgy.
Yeah.
And in the Byzantine liturgy, we're going to say the creed kind of closer to before we receive communion. It's kind of we kind of use it as the creed has always been kind of a big deal as far as unity, and so we kind of say that before kind of moving into, it's more in the liturgy of the Eucharist, kind of close to the Our Father is where we're going to see that. So,
and we're going to, obviously, Father Paul's going to bring a little bit more in-depth questions. I'm probably going to bring a little bit more stupid questions, things like that. But, I mean, somebody says to you, Jack, hey, what religion are you? I mean, is the first word Catholic, or do you actually distinguish and say, I'm Byzantine Catholic?
It kind of depends on the context. I generally say that I'm Catholic because that is the Byzantine Catholic churches, the only real difference between us and the Orthodox churches is that who we're in communion with. We're in communion with the Catholic Church. And so for me, that's a very important thing to let people know that I am a Catholic Christian. But I'm also, usually when I'm talking to Catholics, I'll tend to distinguish a little bit more and say, hey, I belong to the Byzantine Catholic Church, mostly because I want people to know about it. I think it's important for us to, have a mutual understanding. John Paul II talked a lot about that. He talked about the church breathing with both lungs and how we should have kind of an understanding of each other's traditions. And so I think that's important. So I would say it kind of depends on the audience, but I always do let people know that I'm Catholic. I think that's important.
JP too.
Yeah. Joey's obsessed with JPT.
I quote him a lot, and then Father Paul's like, I think Jesus said that, something,
be
something
not afraid.
like that. Yeah. Okay, he said it in an encyclical. He may have been quoting
He did
Jesus,
say it a lot.
but whatever.
Jack, to the point you just made, I think it is just like the awareness of the existence and of the beauty and the treasure of the liturgies of the Eastern churches are something that we really want people to know about. Many people don't know because I say that I'm not on social media, which is mostly true.
Yeah.
I do have one Facebook friend, and my one Facebook friend is actually Jack's church. And,
all right.
And like on their Facebook feed, they've been live streaming. I assume that that's a COVID thing that y'all didn't have before, but like you can go there.
We actually did have it before.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Nice.
We were, but I don't remember why. I think there were just a few people that, the thing is that with an Eastern Catholic Church, you have a lot of parishioners that are spread out. Right. So we'll have people that are like members and they live in, I'm in San Antonio, but maybe they live in New Braunfels or maybe they live somewhere else. And their canonical membership in the Catholic Church is an Eastern Catholic Church. And so they usually register with us and they'll go to receive the sacraments at a local Roman parish, but it's nice to also have that option to live stream. So we've always kind of done that. So we were kind of in a good spot when COVID hit because we'd already.
You guys were ahead of the times.
Yeah,
nice.
we were ahead of the curve there.
But that would be a great way for people who are listening now to learn more about, like, they're going to hear about the similarities and differences. But if you want to plug y'all's Facebook page at any time,
absolutely.
Just
just thinking about differences. I think that the basically all of the sacraments, we have the kind of this, if you look at the Roman Catholic Church and you look at the Eastern Catholic Church and you kind of put the sacraments side by side, you'll see the same ideas and generally the same types of things involved, but there will be differences that will be noticeable. I think for us, we use in our Eucharist, we use leavened bread. That's usually the one that's kind of a big notable difference is, and we put it in a chalice with the wine, and the wine they add warm, actually boiling water to it. So when you receive the Eucharist, it's kind of warm and it's leavened bread, and the whole idea there is that it's living. So you have like the bread that's leavened, so it's risen, it's alive to an extent, and then you have this the kind of the warmer. So that's one of the things. Usually when people come to my church and they receive the Eucharist, they come by after and they say, "It was warm," and they're kind of surprised. It's not something that you're usually going to get.
Why don't we have that? Come on, Father Paul.
We refrigerate everything.
Oh, gosh. So going into that, like you just said, how is that reception of Holy Communion done?
Yeah, so in most of the Byzantine Rite churches, there's one or two that use intinction, where they take the bread and they dip it and they give it to you, like they would. I think that happens in the Roman Catholic Church from time to time as well. Yeah. But most of the time it's in a chalice. So there's kind of this chalice, and the priest, what he'll do is there's like a loaf of bread that's prepared before, and it's prepared in a very particular way. And there's kind of this whole preparatory rite, but the bread itself, there's kind of a square that they cut out of the middle, and then this is known as the lamb, and this is cut up into small pieces. It's put into the chalice, and then the where the consecrated wine is, and the water, and then it's commingled there, and then from there on a spoon you'll receive it in your mouth, and that's how it's distributed.
Nice.
Typically.
I noticed kind of that difference, right? With that's kind of what you're talking about with the sacraments, that there's similarities, but some of those ways of reception, or for example, you guys do confirmation at baptism or at
yes.
Go into that a little bit.
Yeah, so actually I looked at the catechism like right before we were talking, because the catechism does a great job of, like, basically every single sacrament, it'll say, like, this is what we believe, and then this is what the tradition of the Latin Church is, and this is the generally held Eastern tradition, and it'll point out, like, why that is. So with we call it chrismation, because we use chrism, but it's the seal of the gift of the Holy Spirit. That's the main thing. It's the same thing that's happening in the West. But in the East, it's always done right after baptism, and it's to kind of, because it's a sacrament of initiation, and it's to kind of emphasize the unity of those two sacraments, how they come together. Like when you receive those two, you're fully initiated in the church. And that's kind of what the emphasis is. The Catechism says in the West, the emphasis is a little bit more, the confirmation is delayed a little bit because the bishop is the ordinary minister of that sacrament. Right. And there's this kind of connection to you, the faithful, and the bishop that you kind of also experience in the sacrament. So it's just a little bit different emphasis, I guess you could say. Because for us, the priests always are the ones confirming. They're always the ones that are doing the chrismations in the parishes.
Now, as a youth minister, I have to ask, because most people, so personally, I am for that,
sure.
Restored order, all of that. Most people, though, would say to me, as a youth minister, they would say, well, but Jack, if we don't have this carrot to string along for your children to say, hey, but they have to make their sacraments and do this, how are we going to keep them around the church and the faith and that? But yet, I'm sure you and your friends and those who go to your church, like, there's children around, correct?
Yes.
So, I mean, what would you say back to them?
Well, so I don't know if I mentioned this or not, or if this is known, but we also give infants communion. So right after they're chrismated, we don't really have a first communion, right? But what happens is the newly baptized are typically, the tradition is that they're the first to be admitted to communion for the next 40 days. I can't remember if it's 40 or 50 how we do it. Wow. I think it's usually all of Easter tide, because we're usually doing that during Easter.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so we always, the newly illuminated, what we call them, or the newly received into the church, will go and they'll receive communion first. And I guess my answer to that kind of thought process would be, well, when you're immediately engaging these kids, they're growing up and they're participating in the fullness of the liturgical life, and so they don't have this. They immediately feel included, and kids are a big part of the liturgy. Before COVID, we kind of had this little parish tradition where during the gospel reading, the kids would all go to and stand in front of the book, of the gospel book, and they would kind of listen, and they kind of had this privileged place, kind of in reference to let the little ones come to me, that kind of biblical emphasis. And so I think there's all these little ways that you can get children involved in the liturgy. And catechesis is important, but does it need to be a carrot or something of this nature? I don't know that's really that effective. Maybe it is in some context, but I think in our context, it would be a little bit unnatural.
Yeah, no, I don't think it is. I think you're right on. I'll be honest. Yeah, I wanted either really young or really late, because right now in the Diocese of Dallas, we have it in 8th grade, and I won't bore you too long with that. But so I have another question, but you looked like you wanted to say something. This is also kind of nice, Jack. I just want to toss out. It's nice talking to you, because you don't ramble on for really long with answers going like 30, 40 minutes. And then we're like, oh, we've just gone over the bowing at the altar for the Mass part 1.
Yeah, we didn't make it into to the sign of the cross for the first episode. I think the thing is, I think Jack could, though. He's got self-control.
Yes.
Like I can hear Jack. It in his answers. He totally could just go for like 40 minutes on any one of these. My deep and profound question that I have for you right now is the thuribles, the thing that you incense with in the East, the ones I've seen always have bells on them, and I think that's awesome. I want
12 bells.
12 bells.
It's pretty cool. There's
12
bells for the 12 apostles, and there's one that doesn't ring. And that represents Judas.
Yeah,
the one that doesn't.
There's a thing like that in Coptic churches. Actually, they have 12 pillars in the nave, and there's one that is a different color. Like at least I got to go to Egypt, to Cairo one time, and this Coptic Christian was explaining things, and I think all of them were like this sort of kind of white marble, and then there was one that was like very different, like violet or much darker.
That's awesome.
Now is there? Oh, go ahead.
But yeah, so Anyway, y'all's thuribles are awesome, and I have thurible envy.
And I love what you mentioned.
Terrible envy.
The symbolism.
See what I did there? Okay.
The 12 bells.
Yeah.
Awesome. Like, it seems like everything has specific symbols with it, and it's very, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's this, our churches they're designed in a very particular way. And there's a lot of, iconography is a huge part of our tradition. We have a very specific way of representing, liturgical art. And it's all very catechetical in nature. And there's a very specific kind of design and thought process behind it. I don't know a whole lot about iconography, but I kind of do know, generally when you walk into a church, you're going to see Christ enthroned on one side, and you're going to see the Virgin Mary holding Christ in the other. And then you'll see John the Baptist and the patron saint of the church. Those are kind of like things that are always going to be in there. And then there's, depending on how elaborate the church is, you'll see kind of different, different other icons and things. But the images are certainly a huge part of our tradition, and kids like them too. Kids tend to get distracted by them and kind of look around, and it's kind of fun to watch them kind of take that in.
So Jack, you mentioned using the leavened bread.
Yes.
So does that mean at every liturgy, right? Or is it still termed the Mass? Or no, the liturgy?
You can say Mass. We call it Divine Liturgy.
Okay, Divine Liturgy.
You can call it either one.
So at each Divine Liturgy, which I guess sub-question 1 is, how many Divine Liturgies per Sunday do you all have? And then second question is the leavened bread then consumed all at once, or is there a tabernacle similar to what the Roman Rite experience is? Because it seems like we consecrate a bunch of hosts, and then have kind of a surplus and that we're using throughout the week in that. But I would be curious how that works with your guys' experience. Right. So 1, how many Divine Liturgies? 2, how does that work with the leavened bread?
Sure. Typically speaking, you have 1 Divine Liturgy at a parish. That's typically what happens. There are some places that will have a Vigil Divine Liturgy. They'll have one on Saturday evening. And that's usually 9 times out of 10 going to be combined with Vespers. Yeah. Although that's kind of a recent thing. That's not really typical in most Byzantine churches. We have this huge, first of all, Divine Liturgies they take a little bit of time. You're not going to be able to really just come in and leave in an hour. You're going to start, every Divine Liturgy that I have on a Sunday that I go to is usually about an hour and 15 minutes on a typical Sunday. They're longer kind of depending, but so there's that. And so after that, at least before COVID's kind of, done a lot of things to a lot of people, but in our particular case, we used to really have a big focus on community meals afterwards. So we would after the Divine Liturgy, we'll have a potluck or we'll have some kind of coffee hour or something, and the people in the parish kind of get together, and then there's faith formation or what have you. So Sunday is kind of really an event. Like, you're going to go and you're going to be there. And so that's typically what I tell people when they visit, like, be ready to receive some type of hospitality, because when you walk in the door, people are going to greet you, because it's a small group of people. It's very tight knit, and people like to share about it because it is something that's unique. It is something that's different. And that's kind of one of the things that I think we do and we do well. Sometimes you'll have, we have a lot of other services. So the Divine Liturgy is important to us. And it's like the pinnacle, it's like the summit of kind of what we do, but there we have a lot of other services. The Liturgy of the Hours is really important in our tradition. So usually you're going to have like Vespers, you're going to have Orthros, is what we call Matins. It's kind of like Matins and Lauds put together. Yeah, and in a big parish, not all parishes are really big enough to have all these services, because kind of the needs for clergy and things. There's kind of a lot that goes into it. But at a typical parish, you're going to have the 1 Divine Liturgy on Sunday. You're probably going to have a Vespers on a Saturday evening, and then maybe a Vespers during the week. Or during Lent, for example, we have the Liturgy of the Presanctified Gifts, which is a communion service that we do. It's very similar to the one that I think is done on Good Friday.
Good Friday,
in the Roman Catholic tradition. We do that every Wednesday during Lent. So during Lent, we only have like a Divine Liturgy on a Sunday, or I think Saturdays as well. But during the week, we actually we don't consecrate the Eucharist, because the consecration has a very strong connection to the resurrection and in our tradition. And so we do have communion, but it's pre-sanctified. So that on Sunday, the priest would consecrate additional, and then it would be reserved. And we do have a tabernacle, Joey. We do have a tabernacle, but it's usually, we typically don't reserve the sacrament outside of Lent. So it's usually consumed on Sundays.
Got it.
And then we have a place, but we do have a place that we always store a small amount of reserved sacrament for communing the sick and for that sort of thing. Usually we have other services too. Like we have Akathist hymn, we have all these different kinds of devotions, and I'm not going to really dive into that right now, but there's a lot of opportunities for prayer outside of the Divine Liturgy that our parishes would offer.
The Akathist hymn is really beautiful, by the way.
So for somebody who doesn't know anything y'all are talking about, go ahead.
Yeah. So the Akathist hymn is this.
Not the spelling.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's been likened to the Rosary. It's a Marian devotion that we really focus on it during Lent, leading up to the Annunciation. It's kind of like this preparatory, and it kind of goes through different parts of Mary's life, and consequently the life of Jesus as well, and kind of focuses on that in a particular way. And so we have basically in every fasting season, so like during Lent, during Nativity Fast, Advent is what we would call it the Nativity Fast, but it's the same thing. Yeah. We have these particular devotions that we usually focus on in the church, and that we come together to pray.
Awesome.
I had one quick follow-up as well. So you said the liturgy of the pre-sanctified during Lent, and that's also the same thing as the liturgy of St. Gregory the Great?
Yes.
Something like
so
that?
It's
like you have
to
different
Rome.
liturgies within the Byzantine tradition, and then that one actually.
So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we have like two divine liturgies or two masses that we would say basically. Like, so we have the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom and the liturgy of St. Basil, or Basil rather. I'm sorry, St. Basil. I always say Basil. I don't know why, but
I do too. I don't know why either. I
Yeah,
think Basilians in Houston.
Totally.
I don't know.
Some people. I don't know.
Me too.
But yeah, so I actually got corrected for this on Sunday. I was saying Basil over and over. It's Basil. So Saint Basil the Great, we have his liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, and then there's the liturgy of the pre-sanctified gifts, which is Pope St. Gregory's liturgy that ended up in the East and kind of took its own shape. So even though we're Eastern, we do have actually one of our liturgies is attributed to the Pope of Rome. So that's an interesting connection there.
Real quick, I had a moment in my homily last weekend. I was talking about the resurrection. I was talking about sort of Holy Saturday theology and stuff. And I referenced at one point this icon. I think it's kind of like a contemporary style icon at this church, St. George's Orthodox Church in Toronto. Okay. And it has, the reason I referenced it is because at the Casa Santa Maria, where I lived in Rome as a priest, we had an Eastern chapel, and I saw that same icon there.
Which one was it?
It's called Anastasis, and it's got Christ. He's standing in like the almond of light, and the mandorla, and he is pulling Adam and Eve each out by one hand.
This is that's the resurrection. I think it's also known as the descent into Hades or something along that line. But it's Christ literally pulling Adam and Eve up. It's an awesome icon. It's like one of my favorites.
Yeah. When I looked up, I was like, I want to give a reference for people to find this, and I was reading about Holy Saturday in a book, and anyway, long story, but the image there was cited as being from St. George's Orthodox Church in Toronto. But when I referenced it at Mass, I was like, Saint starts with a G, Gregory the Great. And then I was like, what kind of Orthodox church would be called St. Gregory the Great? But then I was like, oh, wait, actually St. Gregory the Great with the liturgy of the pre-sanctified, and all right, we're all good. But it's still not the right church, St. George. Anyway.
So all those
long,
who were
confusing
at Mass,
story.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, Jack, somebody who is like primarily the Roman Rite. Let's just use myself for example.
Sure.
Grew up Roman Rite and in the Northeast, cultural Catholic, grew up Italian, and it's just like, well, we're Catholic and this is what we are. And so let's just say not even living the Roman Rite that great, okay? How would you introduce the kind of Byzantine Rite to somebody like that? / would it be appropriate to take them and come see it? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So, it happens all the time. People just wander into church and they just wander in and they want to know this is a Catholic church, one of your masses or whatever. And I've talked to people several times that just kind of wandered in and wanted to know what's going on. And usually what I really try to do is what I think anyone in any rite of the church should do, and just welcome people in and tell them about Christ, tell them about Jesus, and people will start to see things. And it can be tempting to want to like really share it out and tell people things, and kind of you feel like you're educating them or teaching them. But I think that the liturgy in any rite kind of speaks for itself. I mean, obviously something is happening here people they're looking at the altar. There's the gifts. There's reverencing going on. It might be kneeling, it might be standing, it might be bowing. But I think really what I always say is just come and see, walk in and see. And then if you have any questions, let me know. And usually people will kind of open up, but it would certainly be appropriate to invite someone. If it was somebody a little bit more knowledgeable, I might kind of delve into the differences and things. But usually the first thing I do is I just point out the icon of Jesus and the icon of Mary. And I just kind of say, hey, this is Jesus and this is Mary, your mother. And, you're welcome here anytime. And that's kind of where I go. I usually don't try to dive in any real explanation until people kind of ask. Because I think that's the best way. Come and see is kind of the approach.
That's awesome. And you have how many kids?
I have one. I'm expecting another one.
Oh, congratulations!
Yeah.
Congratulations.
When is your wife due?
She's going to be due around the end of June.
Okay, we'll definitely. Do you know, boy or
girl? We were told it's a girl, but it was supposedly it was like a week earlier than they normally tell you. So they told us to come back to verify, but we're saying it's a girl.
So maybe a girl. That's awesome.
That's what we're thinking.
So another than hypothetical question. We're going a little bit longer today on our question edition if you all are joining us, because we have an expert on the Byzantine Rite, Jack. And so say your first child is a boy or girl? Boy. Okay. What's his name?
James.
So James is 18 years old, says Dad. I like the Roman Rite better. That's kind of what I want to do. Is that allowed? Like, is he?
Sure.
And what does that look like? Does he have to do anything?
No. He can just go worship at a Roman church. I mean, there is a legal way that you can have your rite officially changed. But it's not. So it's just one of these things where the way the canon law is written, in my understanding of it, Father Paul might correct me or verify this, but so you're a Roman Catholic, Joey, and I'm a Byzantine Catholic, but I can go register at any parish that I want to, and I can worship and I can follow that rite. I'm not like bound to follow a particular rite. I love the rite that I grew up in. I kind of grew up actually between the two. My mom's from an Italian Catholic family, kind of like you, Joey. Nice. And so I was always kind of, I grew up kind of knowing both. And there was a time where I did that. I went to a Roman church. I wanted to follow the Roman Rite, and I did it for a little while. And then later on, I found a Byzantine church that I really loved when I moved to Houston. And, I kind of rediscovered it and really got into it. But I think that, my personal opinion here is just wherever you can live the faith, that's where you need to be. And so if somebody wants to go, if one of my children finds they're enriched by the Latin Rite in a particular way, that's, they're growing closer to Christ, and that's all I really care about. And I think that's what unity is supposed to be about, right? That's part of the reason that these different rites exist, is because we're supposed to evangelize and grow the church. And so if the Roman Rite's doing that better, then go for it. Whatever you need to do.
So what would be the purpose then of the official process?
If you wanted to be a priest, or if you want to get married in another church, in our tradition we have married priests.
I was going to bring that up.
One of the things if you're going to be a priest or a deacon or like some type of clergy, you typically have to belong to that rite. And so for ordination, let's say I weren't married and I decided that I wanted to be a Roman Catholic priest, I would have to petition my bishop when it came time for me to be ordained, and he would have to give permission because the canon law, I think canon law calls it, you're a subject of that particular church. And so I would have to complete an official change of church. And so sometimes you'll see that, or when you get married. So like when my wife and I got married, I had the option to become a Roman Catholic and she had the option to become a Byzantine Catholic officially. And that also affects like your kids. So the kids typically, well, I think it gets a little fuzzy, but at least in the Byzantine rite, the kids follow the rite of the father. So even though my wife's actually officially a Roman Catholic, neither of us changed, but she goes to our church. We worship together as a family. But our kids will be Byzantine because I'm Byzantine. And so that's kind of, it just depends on those types of things. And really mainly it's important when you become a priest or if you're to enter a monastery or something like that. I mean, that's really when it matters. But most of the time people say, I want to become Byzantine. I'm like, okay, well, you really don't have to. You can just come to Byzantine church. Or if you want to become Roman, you just go to a Roman church. That's kind of how, I think that's all you really need to do.
Yeah. So I think this is confusing for people, and I kind of direct this to Father Paul, and Jack, you can jump in with comments as well. But
sure.
I feel like Roman rite priests have a kind of very nice comeback to why priests shouldn't be married. But then, we're...
Because Jesus?
Yeah, like because of Jesus and, giving to the life of the church. What if, my son was ill and I had to run out and I have the sacraments and, practicals, different things like that. So how do you reconcile that? Someone, where you could be going there and, like, do you not feel a little bit, I don't know, not hurt is the right word, but... angered by it? They'd be like, well, they can do that, but I can't. Maybe I should have done that, right? Now, and I should say, if I did read correctly, bishops still cannot be.
Yeah, so bishops are... The thing is that the universal church holds celibacy in very high esteem. It doesn't matter what rite you're part of. Like in the Byzantine rite, we would say that someone who lives that life of celibacy, definitely there's a very particular respect that they're doing that for the sake of the kingdom, and that's awesome. And we see that as a higher calling, objectively speaking, I suppose you could say. But the way that our parish life and our piety kind of has developed over the centuries, I think, is a little different. So I mentioned earlier, the daily masses isn't really a part of our spirituality. I mean, the mass is like the pinnacle and like what we do like at certain times to really, celebrate our faith. But I think there's just different ways that we've developed, and we kind of have these emphasis on different things. And I think that, I don't really have a clear answer as to whether or not, or why that is that we have married priests. But I think it's basically was the early tradition, and then it just never developed any other way. I think in the West at some point there were married priests, were there not? Father Paul, was that correct?
Yeah, I was just, there's a really good book I was just looking at the other day, because in our gospel, in the Latin liturgy from this last weekend, the gospel is the healing of Simon's mother-in-law, and so if Simon Peter has a mother-in-law, that means he also has a wife, and so I was reading up on that a little bit. It's called The Apostolic Origins of Celibacy. Really good book, kind of dense. But it was talking about the tradition of sort of the unanimous interpretation of the fathers, both East and West, on passages like this, and on places where Scripture doesn't give us as many details as we'd like, that like a lot of the apostles were married. and there was also this sense that like they left everything to follow Christ when they were called. And so in the Gospel of Luke, for instance, you have Peter saying, "Have we not left everything for you?" And he lists stuff, including wife and children. And so the origins of celibacy as this calling that one receives, particularly in the East in the religious life, like monks are celibate, and it's normally from them that bishops, who are the successors of the apostles, will be chosen. So continuing that sort of thing that like you can see both in the history, both this call from Christ for those to another passage that he points to is when he starts talking about there are some who are born eunuchs, that is, unable to be married and bear children and procreate. Some that are born that way, some others that are made that way, and some that like choose that way for the sake of the kingdom. And so like there he's again talking about this tradition of celibacy, and I would have given like basically the same answer you did just there, that like in all the documents and everything, celibacy is always held up as this real treasure for the church, but that doesn't mean that there's not like I don't know, a whole sort of flowering of devotion and of meeting particular needs of communities, like you see with the married parish priests in the East. And I think your answer about like the sort of needs of the parish is important as well, because so I don't think St. Anne is a very big church where I'm assigned right now. It's very big. It's very busy. There's lots of things all the time. But I think that's basically true of any Latin Rite church. Like the expectations that come out of that tradition of celibacy would really, just practically speaking, not make it a just thing for me to have a family with children, because I would be neglecting either them or the parish. And so like for that sort of model to exist, like the whole thing has to be there. Also the expectations of the people, and also sort of the liturgical traditions and the needs of the parish community and all that. I think that's a good way that you answered it. But yeah, I've gone on and forgotten what Joey asked in the first place. So.
Yeah. You know, that's usually the case when we find that with our questions, is we don't really ever answer them. And then also, we just talk for a long time. So I know we're going on a while now, so I don't know. Any closing comments, Jack, that you have? I mean, we're grateful that you took time. Second, that it was like late at night. You found a time for us to do this. We made you neglect your family and children, so we apologize for that. But I don't know. Any closing comments?
I would just encourage people to, first of all, I think it's really great that you guys are doing this. I think it's great that you're encouraging people to kind of know about the other traditions of the church. I know that you guys have several churches up there in Dallas that I think are awesome. I would encourage your parishioners to just go check it out one Sunday. I know you have St. Basil the Great in Irving. And then I think St. Sophia is the Ukrainian church up there. I've never been to that one. I know you mentioned a Maronite church here as well.
Yeah, Our Lady of Lebanon.
Absolutely. I think I have been to that. I think I went there for Christmas one year when my sister was living up there in Dallas. So I would absolutely say thanks for having me on, and I hope that your parishioners get to go check out a Divine Liturgy at some point.
Can I plug your Facebook page for your church?
Yeah, I think you can do that.
All right, great. So if you want to watch the live stream just to see, if you don't have a chance to go to the ones in Dallas or wherever you are where you're listening, you can go to the Facebook page for Jack's church, which is 3 Hierarchs, Byzantine and Melkite Catholic Mission.
If you could spell it.
I'll say that again. 3 Hierarchs, Byzantine and Melkite Catholic Mission. And so, you can see this really beautiful mission church there. How All right.
Three hierarchs are the three. It's John Chrysostom, Basil the Great, and Gregory the Theologian. They share a feast on January 30th. So that's where that name comes from.
It just happened.
Yeah, it just happened. We just became a mission. So we're like a baby church. We just started. So.
And I'm sure what's going to happen from this is people are going to have follow-up questions because that's what they usually do. So we'll just rack those up, Jack. And what we'll do is we'll plan another one in 6 to 8 months.
Sure.
Another super episode.
Yeah. Good. Even though they'll be like, "Hey, just want to scratch the surface." No, we're gonna bring in the Byzantine expert.
Good.
All of here. So, well, Jack, we want to thank you again. Thank your family for giving us this time. And on behalf of Jack and Father Paul and Joey Scansella, we want to say take care.
God bless.
All right.